Before I introduce our panel, I'm going to give you a little bit of a landscape, really, of what young workers are facing at the moment. So we know that less than 1 in 20 union members are aged between 16 and 24, and so we urgently need to address that demographic shortfall. We do have higher membership amongst older groups, that's true, but what happens when those members who are now in their 50s start their well-deserved retirement? We just aren't bringing enough young members in to fill the gaps from our retiring members. It gets even more worrying when you look at the backbone of our movement, our reps and activists. Our union movement relies on tens of thousands of committed activists up and down the country. They organise our workplaces, represent members and recruit new workers for the union. But the age profile of our reps is even older than the age profile of our average member. We have some great young activists, but far too few of them. Of course, young workers do join unions, particularly if this is a unionised profession or a workplace, but they're very much in the minority. So why aren't young people joining unions? It's certainly not because work is great for them and they're having a wonderful time of it. So what this tells us, we need to look at how we make unions make sense to young people. There's no doubt that they need unions, but we found 3 key barriers to stopping young workers organising and improving things for themselves. Number 1, young workers might be unhappy about their work, but for too many of them, they don't expect any better. All too often, we hear things like, my boss lets me swap shifts sometimes, so I guess I can't complain too much when I have to work late or without pay. As union members, we know this isn't right, and things don't have to be this way. But for too many young workers, they think there's no choice but to go along with it. Number 2, workers are isolated and disconnected from their colleagues. Insecure work and no time to build a relationship with colleagues, and there's a little sense of trust between them. Young workers are worried that their colleagues will tell them if they complain about a manager, for example. Without trust, they can't tackle problems together. And number 3, young workers have told us whenever they try to change things alone, they failed. So that creates a strong sense of futility. Too many young workers just see the price tag of joining a union and the risks in joining a union, but they don't think anything can change. On top of this, we've seen the end of the furlough scheme, which so many young workers relied on for income when their jobs weren't available. We've seen the scourge of fire and rehire, where employers sack staff and then re-engage them on much worse terms and conditions, rear his ugly head. And not to mention national insurance tax hikes that leave many on low incomes worse off, rising rents, house deposits are almost an impossibility for most young people, and food bills are on the rise. So it's no wonder the young workers suffer with their mental health as a result. While workers of any age can be targeted for workplace harassment, abuse or violence, young workers are often proportionately more likely to be the victim of these behaviours. This is due to the sector they tend to work in, the more junior positions they tend to occupy in the workplace, and their relatively weak position in the labour market, affected by low pay, insecure work, and lack of opportunity to progress. The union movement's values are kept as strong for over a century. Times change, but our values remain. If we want to reach these young workers, we need to change the things we do now. That means the whole movement getting behind brilliant campaigns. There are lots of young workers campaigning in things like Ritzy Cinemas and Sports Direct. But we also need to think about trying new things to break down the barriers between young workers and unions. We can't just keep saying the same things louder and hope they work. We need to look at new ways to get young workers on a path to joining unions and keep an open mind. There isn't a magic fix. There's no one thing that will solve all our problems and make everyone join up. We need to take young workers on a journey. And sometimes this might mean doing things that we don't almost immediately look like a union. But we need to do them first to get young people thinking about how they can work together to achieve things. Life for the average young worker in 2022 is a challenge. But while it would be easy to feel overwhelmed by all this, we've seen in the past how we can get real change by coming together and fighting through our trade unions. It's the only way working people have ever achieved any positive change. So I'm now going to have a little introduction to where we can discuss some of these issues and hopefully explore them in a bit more depth. So I'll start with Nick. Nick, would you like to say anything about yourself?
Hi everyone, hope you're all well. So yeah, my name's Nick. I'm the chair of the Unison Wales / Cymru Young Members Forum. I'm also the Young Members Officer for the Cymru and the South British Gas branch, and I am also a rep for that particular branch. My sort of role involves sort of leading the forum, sort of ensuring that young members who are in the forum can engage positively in any way that they feel like they want to. So there's no demands on them to do anything. It's just if some people might want a small role, other people might want a large role. My role is to make sure everyone can participate in a way they feel comfortable with. More broadly, we sort of campaign on issues relating to young workers, specifically in Wales, but also broadly, because there's quite a lot of solidarity with what young members want, both in the UK and across the world. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Nick. That's great. Jo?
Yeah, so I'm Jo. I'm the Women and Equalities Officer for Unite Wales. I'm also the Young Members and Retired Members Officer, and I've got the great privilege of working with our Young Members Committee. And it's something I'm really proud to do. And like Nick, we're campaigning in all sectors and making sure that young members are represented and have a voice. And it's a really important part of my job. And I'm passionate as someone who I wasn't young that long ago, and I've been there, worked in jobs where I've been exploited, and passionate about making sure young workers are coming through the union movement, really.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jo. Stanley, would you like to give a little overview about yourself, your role, and a bit about your background?
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Stanley. I'm from Wales TUC. But before that, I was a union educator and organizer of Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions. It was organizing young people and group them together to share their experience and to exchange their experience of organizing in their workplace. Yeah, this is my former experience. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you all three for joining us. I'm looking forward to our little discussion. In my introduction, I mentioned part of some TUC research that we did in 2018 about like some of what we've figured out was the three main barriers that really the young people don't tend to join unions. I'll come to you first, Nick. In your experience, is that the sort of thing that you would normally see as like the barrier to joining union for people to join in unions, or is there things you think we've missed off that you think it's important that we pay people attention?
Yeah, specifically with young workers, I think the main barriers that they have are that unions aren't always very well publicized in workplaces. So in my workplace, for instance, Unison has a massive presence, so that assists with bringing people on board because it's straight away. I imagine in other other workplaces where the unions may not be recognized, for instance, that's a major barrier. So I think awareness is a big sort of factor for why young people don't always join unions. Another barrier, I think, as well as unions aren't encouraged. Like even in my own workplace, there's a lot of stuff like, "Oh, you don't need a union rep; it's fine," stuff like that. So I think that first they may be like, "Oh, it's fine," and I can just trust what that person says. Then over time, they'll be more likely to sort of go and actually join a union because they realise they can't trust that so-called friendly voice to do. So I think I think a big part of it is both awareness and encouragement for sort of in terms of young people joining. I also think. I generally over time as they get older, they'll have more of a chance to experience the more sort of negative sides of the workplace, and that will push them to join unions. So I think what the main aim unions should have would be sort of early intervention, if you like, to sort of raise awareness earlier. So hopefully to try and prevent those negative situations even happening in the first place. Obviously, that won't always be possible, but it's definitely an ideal to work towards.
Really interesting. Yeah, that visibility I think is a really important thing because if you don't know a union's there, so why would you join? I think that's a good point. Jo, how about you?
I think exactly the same. I think it's visibility and where we know young workers are placed. I think we've got to do better. And I was just looking at the research that you mentioned about where young workers are concentrated, and it is hospitality, it is the service sector. If we thought things were bad previously, it's got so much more compounded since COVID. And I think looking at the research, 2/3 of all those that have lost their jobs since the start of COVID were young workers, which tells you everything that you need to know. They're not in the organised sectors where we're campaigning to save jobs and mitigate redundancies. They're in the sectors where they need a union more than ever. And I think the barrier is, Nick's I think already said that, they don't know what a union is necessarily, and you don't get involved in a union until you know that you need it through a workplace issue, or if your parents are in a union and you've got that awareness of it. I went into Cardiff, I always talk about this, I went into Cardiff University and I spoke to third year students who were studying social sciences. And I asked the question, I polled them and said, how many of what a trade union is? And these are people that are going to go into, careers and professions that are really important. And not one of them knew what a trade union was. This is like the young adults and young leaders of the future. And that sort of tells you where we're at. It's about the awareness. It's about, it's the things that Nick said. And it's the things we do, really. We've got to be better at making opportunities and being visible. You join a union when you see people that look like you. And so I think Nick and myself are pretty much similar on that answer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And you're right about that visibility or awareness of trade unions being one of the barriers, because, again, another piece of research where we interviewed 100 young workers and asked them the similar sort of questions about unions. And one of the questions was, where would you go if you had a problem at work? And the first thing people said was HR. And as Nick said, they're a business function, so they're not always going to be on your side on that. The second place was Google. And then, so we need to push that, we should push that awareness. And so before I come to Stanley, I suppose the follow-on question to you, Nick and Jo, is how do we address this awareness issue then? If you could address it, what sort of things do you do, for example, Nick, in your workplace, to try and push that up the agenda, really, so people know the unison?
Yeah, I totally agree with Nick and Jo that I think that Hong Kong is also facing the same situation, that most of the young people, they don't think that they have the identity of workers. They have so many part-time jobs. Okay, when they were studying in their school time, but unfortunately that they unions and also the culture may not fit into the workplace. What I mean, they are on the precarious status. They don't know what the problem is, and they don't know how to deal with the problems. But they don't know the answer is maybe from trade union or maybe from other brothers and sisters in the unions. They don't know how to find the answer, and then many times they always rely on social media. But the social media sometimes they don't favor in the labor sense. Then they always try to solve the problems by themselves, or maybe many of them they will leave out the job and then I have got the job and then go to the other workplace. Then the problem may be solved, but that's not true. Okay, I think I totally agree with like that the awareness of the young people should be raised, and also we have to encourage more young people to know more about their right.
Yeah, it seems that's a common thing, that people feel isolated, or they might not realise this is how they deal with it. And the solution's right there with trade unions, but they don't know that is the solution. So like you said, people either leave or just carry on as it is. And young workers are more likely to be in transient jobs or that casualisation of work, where they move from place to place. So that investment in that place is at risk as well. So I think that is really interesting. We discussed about like awareness. So I think it'd be good, because one of the best ways to get awareness, I think, is when unions run campaigns, because that shows then we're here for you. So I think I'll come to Jo first on this, in terms of what sort of campaigns is your union running now that you think resonates well with young workers?
There's a few at the minute that I think are important. The overall know your rights as a young worker, and I think you'll be aware of our community membership, which allows students to join the union, and that's a really good way of capturing people that aren't in employment. So that's really important for us. But we've got a number of campaigns where we know, especially in the hospitality sector, so we've got our Get Me Home Safely campaign, which looks to make sure that there are provisions, transport provisions, to make sure that those who work in the nighttime economy are getting home safely, and that the employers are complying with their duties at present, and making sure that and it is mainly young workers that work in that sector, have a safe means of transport, because we know public transport, especially in the city centre in Cardiff, for example, buses stop running at 11 o'clock, and the provisions of taxis are greatly reduced because of licensing provisions and things like that. So we are working to make sure that's the case. We've heard our young members, we've heard students as well of late telling us how they've been assaulted in the street, and that's on their commute, by the way. That's going to and from work. It's not just on a night out. We absolutely need to do better. There's lots that we're doing. I've spoke about it so many times. Fair wages for all ages. I mean, our members feel so strongly, our Young Members Committee in Wales feels so strongly that no matter what your age, you're paid the same wages for that work. And that's what it's all about. Your bills aren't any less just because you're under the age of 25. We've all got cost of living increases. And then there's loads that we're doing. Our Young Members Committee in Wales put a motion to our national policy conference about developing a new fit for purpose organising and recruitment strategy for young workers, developed by young workers. That's what it's all about. It's no good me and you, Gareth, telling young workers why they should join. They want to know from other young workers, and having those campaigns that are relevant. It's not just about the workplace, it's about our standard of living. And when young workers are getting the raw deal, we're the voice there saying it's not good enough, that young workers have been hardest hit. So there's lots we're doing, and I think the joint stuff we'll be doing as the TUC is going to be important in the years to come.
Thanks, Jo. Yeah, that Get Home Safely campaign, I think, is so important to show the role the unions have around health and safety, and explaining to employers that their duty of care still extends beyond the workplace, because they are coming to work for you and they should be getting home safely, because the only reason they're in town is because they're coming for their employment. So that duty of care does extend, and it's important that unions are fighting on that. I think that's a really important campaign that Unite doing around that. Nick, how about you?
No, well, yeah, I agree completely with what Jo said. The sort of stuff I'm going to mention now is very similar. It's just from the Unison side. So from the Unison side, the main campaign relevant and resonating with members is the Respect Your Youth Charter. So similar to what Jo said, it's sort of 5 key demands that sort of non-negotiables that we're advocating for on behalf of young members. So those demands are: so pay the real living wage regardless of age, create and maintain quality apprenticeships, employment, quality in the workplace, and promoting development opportunities. So they're short, sweet, non-negotiables, because what's most important when sort of engaging with young members is don't be patronizing, don't sort of give some wishy-washy stuff. It's to give clear demands that we want that will sort of benefit young workers. So that's the sort of that campaign. It's not really a campaign, but something Unison did before Christmas that I'd say resonated with young people was running a young members conference, where sort of motions were submitted, people got together, sort of discuss matters. That was really important, because I know from speaking to young members, a big part of it is they want to get to know other people. There's that social element. So whilst it's not so much a campaign, I'd say that really resonated with young people, because they came from across the country, across the UK, and sort of met together in Cardiff and got to know each other. And I think that was really important. We should aim to do more stuff like that in the future, because I think that's what really resonates with young people. So in short, having those clear demands that are relevant to young people, and sort of giving them an opportunity to enjoy themselves while campaigning on it.
Yeah, you're right. Messages that resonate with their lives is something that's going to hook people into that sort of stuff. And that don't patronise young workers is such an important thing, because I do think sometimes people will say, I was speaking to the youngsters the other day, and like that's that sort of thing, where these are people in work, often with rent they're paying, they might have children. That people do, I think, sometimes risk othering them rather than seeing them as part of the union with challenges and stuff now. So I think that's really important. The question for you, Stanley, what sort of campaigns or things that you do that really resonated with workers back home? So what really drew people in? What do they find interesting?
Yeah, I really totally agree with that. About we don't always use the full time to talk about the campaign, because young people have to everyone to exchange, and they really want to listen to other people's story. And 4 to 5 years ago, we have organized a mini concert to share to attract the young people to listen to the story of workers. This is our album called Wildfires. Yeah, we have made a music album produced by a popular music producer in Hong Kong. I think this is one of our young projects in our Hong Kong Labour movement. The other thing is we have held a youth summit. Okay, youth summit in Asia Pacific region. We invite some of the countries like Philippines, South Korea, and Taiwan brothers and sisters, young brothers and sisters, to come to Hong Kong to share their experience and strategy of their countries. How, for example, in Philippines, they have organized the fast food workers, because there's so many young workers, so many young people, they are working in fast food, but they're suffering from. So I think this is so many common problems in the rest of the world. So we shared with our young members have listened to their experience and also a strategic plan from the Philippines, and then we have learned from each other and then try to modify in our workplace in Hong Kong, and then we develop our own strategic plan, something like that. This exchange is really important to every. I think it's really important to all the trade union around the world, and we try to figure out a way to not just copy, but have to modify and fit it into our own situation. Yeah, it's something we did before in Hong Kong.
That's really interesting. That sharing of best practice, whether it be from country to country or union to union, is really important, because often I think, particularly if you're a rep working alone, you might feel quite isolated in trying to deal with those challenges. So to have that sort of solidarity amongst people, I think is a really useful tool. And I like the idea of music festival, because the TUC have tried. We've had an event at Green Man where people come in, and that was one of the most successful things I've done in terms of engaging with young people about what unions are and having those sort of conversations. But have your own festival with your own album, that's taken to a new level. I really like that.
Let's find time to share the music video. Yeah, let's find some time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I look forward to that. We'll share that on our social media, maybe. Another thing I think I wanted to discuss is, we know from some research we've done that when we've looked at what motivates young workers, it's usually they want to get on in life, which shouldn't be surprised, because that's something we all want to do. But often their experiences of work tends to be, the only training they tend to get is, say, their induction, and then any sort of like mandatory health and safety training, and then that tends to be it. So when it comes to career progression, I think union learning is a good opportunity to sort of engage with young people there. What's your aspirations in terms of progressing within this sector or with this industry or whatever? So I don't know whether any of you have had any experiences of using things like the Wales Union Learning Fund or personal learning accounts, all sorts of other things, to try and use that as a sort of hook to get people involved. I'll come to Jo first.
Yeah, I think it's part of our courses, and our National Young Members Committee make sure that we have specific training for young workers and our young members that develops their confidence, but also their know-how. So I think it's part of everything we do in terms of our equalities agenda. So yeah, we look for every opportunity, and our Young Members Committee in Wales are a force to be reckoned with, and they make sure that every opportunity for our young members to learn and to develop in a safe space with other people that look like them is really important. We're making it part of our it's part of our education programme and has been for a very long time, but we're making sure that we're taking that out to our workplaces, and other young people are having those opportunities. Yeah, it's vital to what we do.
Great, wonderful. Nick?
Thanks, Gareth. So I don't have any direct experience of a union learning rep in my particular workplace. I'm aware you're what they do specifically, because you've obviously told me in the past what it does. But I think it's really important that union members have access to training, because even if it wouldn't be something for their particular job at that present time, it can help them maybe get into another job that they want to go to. I think part of the problem that young members face, I think often employers would probably be quite hostile giving facility time for that particular. Sometimes it can be difficult enough if you're a rep yourself, for members more generally, that's going to be incredibly difficult. So I think the challenge we have is to sort of make sure as much as possible employees can get access to the training opportunities that unions provide. But yeah, I do think it's really very important.
Yeah, and that is one of the challenges when it comes to learning reps really engaging with people and the way they'd like to it. But I suppose the idea there is, I suppose you sort of link it to the employer and say, because we've had employers say things like, what happens if I let you train my staff and then they leave? And then so the response to that is, what if you don't train your staff and they all stay? Because that's going to be the workforce you're going to be left with then. So it's about showing that learning these skills makes them a better employee, makes them more committed to that workforce, because you're invested in your staff. So that's where that sort of bond comes in. Going back a bit to the beginning, the first questions we spoke about we talked about visibility or awareness of trade unions. And every conference, I think, without fail, that I've spoke about young workers, someone's always put their hand up and said, "Oh, we should teach it in schools. We should," as like the stock answer to like anything when it comes to young workers. And this is something that the Wales TUC have started looking into. And I know the Scottish TUC has been doing it for 10 years. But Jo, I know Unite have been doing quite a lot of work around this. And you sent me one of the videos you show in schools, which I thought was really good. And what I really liked about it wasn't like a dry history of trade unions. It was young members speaking about this is what affects them and this is how it impacts them now. So would you like to talk a little bit about that for me, please?
Yeah, Equalities for about the last 5 years now, it's had a national programme called Unite in Schools, and we go into schools, and it's mainly with year 10 and 11s, and we talk about the role of trade unions in the workplace, but in terms of wider society and the achievements of unions. And in that time, we've spoken to thousands of young people about trade unions, and it's not about us going in and promoting Unite, it's about promoting the trade union movement and that whole idea of collectivism. We get them doing activities, and we raise general awareness. And it is our members, so our workplace reps, along with volunteers and young members, who go in and deliver those sessions. And it's been really successful. And we've spoken to schools right across the UK, and it's really needed, and the teachers welcome it. And there's resources now for both union members, students themselves, and teachers on our website. So it's all there, but it's so fascinating. I've gone into some of the schools in Wales, and I know my colleague Pasty Turner is doing the same, and it's brilliant. Obviously, that's been stalled a little bit with the pandemic. Things are moving online, but the appetite, I think we've wrote to over 300 schools in Wales, and the response has been overwhelming to the point where we haven't necessarily got the capacity, because it's so welcomed by the schools. And it's just honestly that awareness, like, and putting it in their terms, the unions are campaigning for votes at 16. It's not something that is alien. The fact that you've got weekends is because of us, and putting it in their language, in their context, explaining that footballers are in unions and like musicians and things like that actually is so beneficial. And I think any joint effort that we can do to deliver that on a bigger scale in Wales, I'd welcome it open-hearted, because I think it's so important. And the engagement from the kids, we've done sessions as well with the Football Federation and the young girls there, and it was absolutely incredible. And we talked about equality and just the role of unions, and that's what we've got to do. We can't have a generation coming through like the students at Cardiff University who didn't know what a union was on that day. We've got to do better, and that's the visibility. And what about the Welsh Curriculum? I'll leave that there. If the Welsh Curriculum's been developed, then we need to work with our partner teaching unions and get it on the curriculum and have it. Social partnerships here to stay. So we need to be educating our young workers and, well, our young people who aren't yet our young workers on the benefits of unions. And Gareth, I'll say it again, we've got a youth council in Wales. So why are we not, or a youth parliament, so why are we not engaging with them and having a day about trade unions? And I'll leave it there, but I think the Schools Project for Unite it's incredible, and it's really made inroads to some of our young people. So brilliant.
I take your point on the youth parliament. I absolutely think that looking towards the next Heart Unions week, for example, it would be great to engage them in an event on something like this. So I totally agree with you on that. And yeah, to get that awareness amongst young people and on issues that they care about. So, for example, when like I said, when we did Greenman, we did a mini Greenman where we went to where the under-16s spend a lot of time. And so we delivered the same sort of talks, but in a more engaging way for people of that age. And we focused on things like environmental issues and what trade unions are doing around environmental issues. And we talked about like clean clothes, for example, and when it comes to who makes your clothes. And that sort of thing is really important to people. But what they don't think about is maybe the labour conditions for people doing there, and it's unions that's improving that. So it's linking those messages in so that people can see the breadth of what trade unions do as well, I think is really good. So yeah, it's really encouraging the stuff that Unite's doing there in schools and reaching out in that way. 2 more questions, I think, and then I'll see if you've got any questions from the floor to want to take us. The first question, I think, is quite a nice one. I want to try and finish on happier questions. I'll start with Nick first and ask you, what's your proudest achievement or your proudest moment in your role so far?
Yeah, it wasn't so much an achievement, it was more of a sort of moment. So it was at the Young Members Conference in December. So I was, because I lead the regional forum, so I had to assist sort of members of our regional forum get into Cardiff and participating. And it was really nice to see them sort of all sort of engaging with each other, engaging, having a good time at the conference. I know, obviously I'm not claiming all the forgetting them there, but it was nice to see that we'd been able to arrange a sort of trip down to Cardiff to see all young people sort of contributing and participating in an event. It would be great to see it more in future. Another event, it wasn't so much a proud moment, but a good event, was going down to the Welsh Senedd. It was when I'd just become a young members officer, actually, and we actually spoke to Welsh politicians, members of the Senedd, and sort of put forward our young members charter to them, because that really felt then like we were making progress. Sadly, coronavirus has sort of put a stop to all of that, but it would be great to bring back some of those moments now. We're hopefully anyway moving out of the worst of it.
Yeah, and if I know you, Nick, you won't leave it alone. Even though COVID's gone, now the things are picking up. You'll be back with your charter, I'm sure, reminding them what they said. Stanley, how about you? In your experiences, what would you say is one of the most proudest moments in your trade union?
I think in the former times that we have developed a young leadership program in our trade unions. That this is a very intensive course when we are at the time, and we try to group the young people together to study different type of contents of, for example, the organizing method and also the something like that. And the other thing is we always try to use social media. I think this is the popular tools of the different world or of the different countries. That social media is we have to use in a popular way. I always share with my idea with my friends that we don't sometimes we just have talk to speak. We have to use the social media, but how to use it? There's lots of message, lots of data in the internet, but how can we catch the main point and what we want the young people to know the point of that? We have to decide. We have to figure out what is the data the young people know and what is the knowledge that the young people have to get to know, get to understand. We put a lot of effort to this. And then also I want to echo with Nikki that we try to encourage young people to speak more in legislative, which is the Senate, Cardiff, similar organization. If there's some public panel that to let the citizen, let the Hong Kong people to present a voice about the labor situation or the economic situation, that we try to encourage, we try to push the young members to share the idea in the council. I think this is one of the main role that trade union can fit into, that we have to encourage the young people to think more about the social problem and what is going on nowadays in our society. Yeah.
I think there's some really important points you've made in there. I think one of the things we've said in the Young Workers Toolkit, which we'll post a bit more information in the end, is give the young workers a voice to make their own points. Like we put in the toolkit, like pass the mic. Don't think, well, I'll speak on like myself as an older guy, like I'll speak on behalf of the young people because I think I understand them. The idea is give them the platform so they can make their own points and fight their battles, because they're more than capable of doing that. So and making room within the trade union movement to allow that to happen. And I think that's a really important thing. And the leaderships program, I think, is a great idea in terms of equipping people with the skills and knowledge they need to take that forward. Jo, what's your proudest?
There's loads of things, but I think, do you know what, when you see a young member who's come through the structures and they're empowered and they are pushing back and they are standing up for what they know is right and feel empowered, knowing they've got the backing of us, there's nothing more rewarding than that. And that's what our job is about as trade union officials. And I think just seeing them getting organised, right, even within the union, and winning big things, like we've just, because of the campaign and they've done, we're going to have a national Unite youth coordinator. We're going to have a working strategy that is for young workers. And that's come from the lay members. It's not come from myself going, this is a great idea. So when I see them develop and progress through the movement and become, by the way, trade union officials or the most amazing workplace reps, that's what this is about. And that's what makes me proud, because unless we know our rights, we can't use them. And my God, some of those reps are going to be outstanding. They're the future general secretaries of our movement. They're the future Francis O'Grady's and Shavs. That's how amazing some of these young workers are. And wait until we get Unison, GMB, Unite, and all of our other affiliated unions together, because they will be a force to be reckoned with. So they make me proud every day, honestly. And I can pretend to be young when I'm with them, and that's quite important for me.
Yeah, I'm proud on your behalf listening to that. That sounds amazing. Yeah, great stuff. So final question from me, and then we're going to take some questions from the floor. So if you had a magic wand, what 3 things, and if you're going to think of 1 or 2, then that's fine, but what 3 things would you like to see so we really engage with young workers? It can be literally anything. So I'll start with Nick.
No, so I have got 3. So my first one, this is more from an personal perspective. I'd ask for improved facility time, both for like people like myself and also for members in general. Because if we, for instance, if I was able to claim facility time to specifically engage with young members, that would give me, I could prepare social media posts, I could prepare engagement, I'd have all these things I could do. But sadly, the chances of me getting that are next to none. But more generally for young members in general, we're talking about union learning earlier on. If you had better facility time, that would get young members more engaged with those sort of programs, and then that would assist them with their career development. So that's my number one. My second thing would be a sort of joint forum for all the unions and sort of a sort of overall conference. I think that would sort of a large scale event, sort of that's something that really has some sort of, I think that would really sort of resonate with people, because it would show young members that actually we have got a voice, and that we can actually and hopefully get noticed by the press, more by the government. That brings me on to my last point. So this is more sort of politically speaking, but it's for sort of political parties to start thinking about young people in general as a sort of afterthought. That sort of, and this comes from all political parties. You feel like with their manifestos, it's very much aimed at what sort of older generations want. And whilst it may make sense from an electoral standpoint, because sadly young people are less likely to vote, it doesn't, that's part of the problem. Young people don't vote a lot of the time, obviously not all the time, because they don't think that the political parties have anything to offer them. And I think that's something, I think the leadership really needs to come from the top on that one and give something, young people something to hope for. So yeah, in short, my 3 wish lists are improved facility time, a joint forum for all the unions, and for political parties to stop viewing us as an afterthought.
That's a great list. It's a really good list. And yeah, and hopefully the unions in schools thing will help with some of that political education to let people know that you can change things, and you can change things in your workplace and in society. So hopefully that will address some of that. But yeah, it's a really good list.
All right, so mine, people would probably say are radical, but they're not for us. And that would be fair wages for all ages, like scrap the age differentials with the minimum wage and the living wage, because we've all got cost of living and it's no different based on your age. So that'd be the first thing. Second for me would be for society in general to see young workers as an investment, not simply an opportunity for cheaper labour that they can exploit. So when we're going for apprenticeship schemes, by the way, you don't get to the end of it and then we'll pay you, we'll put you on a low rate again or get rid of you. So that's the first thing. If we are an investment, make sure it's meaningful. Then this one's more looking inwards at what we can do, and that's for the trade union movement to change the narrative of, oh, well, young workers are the future, which I think Nick alluded to. And that means like developing our young members now and supporting them now, because they are present, they're here, they're now, and we've got to do something to support them, because if they are the most exploited group of workers facing ageism, discrimination, no career progression, low pay, and it's our job to organise them and make sure that they are protected and that they're the future trade unionists. So they're my 3 wishes, and I'm going to add a 4th, which is to work with Nick and other unions in Wales. So we do have a fighting back young membership that can make demands to Welsh Government and other employers as well. So that's my 4th, if I'm allowed one, that is, Gareth.
Yeah, that's fine. You could have started with, my first wish is to have unlimited wishes, and then just keep on going on with your big list of demands.
Yes.
Yeah, I think some really strong points in there, and yeah, that joint work together is something I think is something we can absolutely work on. Stanley, do you have any wishes?
Yeah, wow, that's there's so many. Yeah, firstly, I agree with Nikki that I think all of the organizers want to have more time to figure out how, yeah, to figure out what is the content and how study more about the situation of the young workers, and also we need to spend more time to listen to them, to communicate with them. So I think time is really important for organized people. And the second thing I wish is creative mind, because young people really enjoy socializing and they really enjoy everything that makes more fun. So try to make everything for more fun. But sometimes some of the senior organizer like me or us maybe work in. Okay, we will work very hard, but sometimes we don't try to think out of the box. Okay, we just step by step. Okay, there's no problem, but we sometimes when it is a special situation or some young people are facing a new problem, that can we put ourselves into their shoes. So I think this is one of the things is the creative mind. And the last thing is I wish every union members, especially union leaders, we have an open minded. Okay, we don't set any answer or don't set any assumption to every young people. We have to listen to them, and we have to more inclusive. And or there's that, because the world is changing rapidly, and
Yeah.
we cannot we cannot understand everything in one moment. So we have to learn. Okay, we have to learn from the young people, and what they're listening is what they're talking about is our lesson every day. So I think, yeah, open-minded, creative mind, and also time.
Like you were saying, with new members comes new ideas and new ways of doing things rather than us keep on doing the same old. So I absolutely agree with that. And again, you mentioned about listening to what young workers want and then doing that rather than us trying to tell them how they should fit in with our union, is how our union can fit in with how they do things. And I think that's a really interesting thing as well. So I've got a few questions that's come through. We've got about 10 minutes left of this session. One of them was more of an observation, really, and that came from Richard Jackson from Unite, who spoke about the work that the Wales Union Learning Project's done around things like traineeships, kickstart, and apprenticeships. So I think that's a really important way of engaging with, again, as Jo said, with engaging with young workers on that sort of career path, and seeing apprenticeships as a genuine opportunity rather than as cheap labour, which unfortunately sometimes that does happen. So yeah, I know Richard and Sue have done a lot of great work around that sort of stuff. We've got another question here that's for me, which comes about in my introduction, I mentioned that sometimes we need to do things that are not union. And what do I mean by that? What I meant by that is, when I listed those three things, one of at the beginning, the three challenges, one of the challenges is people sometimes don't trust their colleagues, so they don't tend to then join together, try and solve problems as a collective. So one of the things we need to do before we even have an organising conversation is try and build that trust amongst colleagues to create that safe space. And this links in a little bit to what you've all said, really, about like social events, because by going to, say, I don't know, I use bowling as an example. I don't know if people go bowling anymore. It could be just something that's really outdated now. But if you have like a bowling event, you go once a month or once a fortnight or whatever, and you go as a group of colleagues, that starts building trust with people because you start knowing more about those people. And in every single place I've worked, if you go out with the people you work with, you inevitably talk about work. That conversation's going to come up anyway. You haven't even got to organise that conversation. It will happen. So then people can start having those discussions. And gradually, once that trust is built, then you can start having organising conversations. So it's about thinking about things in a little sort of different angle. So yeah, and there's loads of examples across the world about that sort of stuff. Again, we did Green Man, we did stuff on the garment industry. The way they organised is, again, there was no trust within the factories, but they set up a savings club, and then people would come to the savings club week in, week out and do that. And that's where they would organise the workers rather than in the workplace. So it's just thinking a little bit differently outside the box on how we have those engagement conversations. And then we have another question. Oh, one thing we haven't mentioned is street patrols or workplace canvassing. So that's something that has happened in Scandinavia. They've been doing it for 10 years. And our colleagues in Yorkshire and Humber have also started doing a little bit of that. So that's essentially, you get a group of young workers together and you go to workplaces, you pick high street shops or restaurants or wherever, and you have those sort of conversations. And funny enough, I'm going to pick Starbucks out as the one that I would like to engage with. And because this week I saw a website that Starbucks launched on why you shouldn't join a union if you work for Starbucks. So they put this out there. So that instantly gets them on my hit list of someone I want to go know and have a conversation with. But I wanted to engage you guys with that a little bit about how do you think that would work? Do you think that would be if you was, for example, Nick, if you was working in Starbucks and we come to the door and have that conversation, do you think that would be a useful thing for you to engage in, or do you think that wouldn't work for you?
No, it would. For me, it would depend on the workplace. So what I'd be conscious. I think it's a great idea in principle. What I'd be cautious of is, depending if you've got like a bad boss and an employer, and you see them speaking to union reps at the door, I'd just be worried that it could lead to some young members being targeted unnecessarily. And whilst we should be aiming to increase participation across all sectors, we've just got to be careful, because sometimes, particularly for young people, they can't afford to just lose a job and just go somewhere else. Obviously, that's true for a lot of time for all workers, but considering young people specifically, that would be my only concern about. I think there'd be ways around it, maybe go into places where the unions are already recognised, having some sort of agreement. I think it could definitely work. It's just we've got to be careful about how we go about that.
Absolutely, and I think the key to that is not to be pushy sign up now unions, but to have conversations with people about their experiences of work, just to get people to think about how things are for them, and then you can, as these questions come in about looking to engage, Susan Craig has come in with a question about look to engage young workers in their own space, and that could be online or offline. You can have those sort of conversations, and if people want to have those conversations, you could do that over WhatsApp, for example, which is a safer space for people to have that conversation than, like you said, with their bosses looking over their shoulder. So I totally get that. Jo, do you have any comments on any of that?
No, I think we proved how that could work with the TGI Fridays campaign and some of the stuff we're doing around Amazon, really. And I think Nick's right. If we went in there and said, join a union, a lot of people are scared to talk to us because of the boss breathing over their shoulder. So, but we've got to be visible, we've got to be present. And just thinking about what Susan said, for example, when we have a presence at Pride, and the union's role in that is to make sure that Pride remains political. One of the really interesting things that our LGBT plus committee chair said, who's Phil Jones, he was saying that young people were coming up to our stall and they didn't realise what our role was in history. And this young person didn't realise what Section 28 was. And it wasn't until he had that conversation with Phil that he understood where that come from and what our role as a union movement was in historically, but what our role is right now. So being present at festivals, whether it's the Miners' Gala, the cool places that kids go. I'm too old now to know where they are, but being at those festivals actually where you're going to capture those people. And dare I say it, TikTok and Instagram is where we need to be, and we need influencers to be talking about unions, because by the way, it does help, doesn't it? I know some of the Love Island celebrities or whatever they are talking about it, and it actually makes a difference because they are like me or you, and they're in a union because it matters. Yeah, we need to be at these events in Wales, wherever it is, the Welsh festivals. We need to have a presence as a union movement in general, don't we? Need to be talking to school councils, to community groups, faith groups. We need to be everywhere and reaching out to our young members who are Black and ethnic minority as well, because they are just as important. And sometimes we collect young workers and say, we've got this image of what they are. And again, who was it that said, don't be patronised? And actually, some young people have children, they're professionals, they're amazing adults. Don't patronise us and put us in a box over there. Let's do better and engage. And by the way, ask them what they want, because we've got ideas of street stalls and going around places. What is it that we bring them together and let them tell us, Gareth, what they want? I think that's the way forward, really.
Yeah, absolutely. We come full circle there, really, because at the very beginning we were talking about raising awareness by being visible, and we talked about that in the workplace, but now we're talking about being visible online, whether, like you said, whether it's TikTok or what have you, or whether it's festivals, and it's being where spaces where young people are to be able to have those conversations and remain visible. So I think that's a really good point. I'm going to wrap up now. I don't know if anyone got any additional points you'd like to add. If you are, you're more than welcome to add them. No, fine. In which case, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'd like to thank the audience for attending. We have a Wales TUC toolkit that goes a little bit more into this. It's aimed at more senior reps on how to engage with young workers. It's got lots of hints, tips there on, for example, social media and that sort of stuff. Also, on our social media channels, we've been doing a little drip, basically a film a day on some of the stuff you might want to think of as a rep on engaging with people. So things like mapping exercises to see where your workers are, where you've got gaps, and if you've got gaps, then what you need to do to fill those gaps, that sort of thing. Yeah, please check all those sort of stuff out. And thanks very much for coming.